Lena, Xiao, pronouns are fine.
Wasifa, Shirley.
Okay, if the opening of speakers could introduce themselves and offer any preferred pronouns if they have one, that'd be great.
Your mic isn't working, Naomi. Still not working.
Yeah, we unfortunately can't hear you. This is big. Here.
When you have deviated from your glory days as a star club, we as the fan club are in a unique crisis where we yearn for the memories of cheering in a stadium and the rush when we see the playoff being won by a team who feels like our family. What we're going to prove on opening government is that it is uniquely the capital from the Saudi investment fund that will allow our club to return to its glory days. I'm going to talk about three things in this speech. Firstly, characterizing the current economic state of our club and illustrating what alternatives that you would have to turn to are probably worse. Secondly, explaining the benefits for the fan clubs of getting more resources in terms of capital. And then thirdly, a lot of mitigation, but we're still going to have large quantities of operational autonomy under our side of the house. First claim, what is the current economic state of the club and why are alternatives probably going to be worse? When the club is not being successful, it does not only manifest in worse results tangibly, but it also manifests in an economic crisis for the club. This is for a few reasons. Firstly, fan clubs are uniquely alienated. Even if you have a support base of fans, you need fans to be willing to buy tickets to come and see your game, which you're going to be unlikely to do if they have to see a team who continually loses. But more importantly, there's probably a crisis where you have fewer fans in the first place because you don't like to get behind a team who continually fails you. But more importantly, a lot of fans turn to the team because of like competitive success in the first place. Secondly, you don't have that much sponsorship revenue if you're doing poorly as a team. Advertisers prefer to brand themselves behind a team who is winning and being successful, but also you get more advertising revenue when you get more airtime. And the kind of games that get airtime are like the high level matches that are really, really tense, but also when you make the playoffs and you actually get airtime during the really important stages. The final thing to note here is that worse economics tends to be self-reinforcing because you have less capital to buy players that continue then makes you do worse economically as a team. What then are the comparatives that Op team has to defend? Either they can defend this team is doing terribly economically and terribly competitively. I'll explain why that's bad in the next argument, or they need to defend a couple other alternatives of how this club would try and raise capital. What are these alternatives? A couple things. And note that even if fans would ideally want to retain operational autonomy and not turn to these alternatives, the actor who ultimately makes the decision are the business owner in charge of the club, who is probably doing worse economically and therefore will probably turn to a quick influx of capital. A couple alternatives. Firstly, I think you would just end up turning to the Saudi investment fund at some point in the future. This, however, is substantially worse because your club is probably in a more dire stage economically. The more dire stage your club is in economically, the worse bargaining power you have when it comes to negotiating a deal with the fund in terms of things like operational autonomy, because they know that you're substantially more desperate. Secondly, though, you might turn to just other kinds of like Saudi or domestic investors who often have a larger stake in the sport industry overall, just like wealthy managers who might try and buy up your club. This, however, is worse for a couple reasons. Firstly, when you have another investor who is less rich than literally the richest investor in the world, you have less operational autonomy, because when your club is doing worse economically, it's far easier to justify things like robust changes of your management and how you run the club, because you can claim that you are poor and therefore need the help more. But secondly, the Saudi fund is committed to a variety of different objectives that are often removed from sport. They often just invest in like a lot of pension funds. This objective is not particularly unique to them, as opposed to like an individual wealthy manager. Therefore, they're not going to feel the need to pressure your club to the same extent because they have so many other assets to fall back on. Second claim, how are we able to get more resources under our side of the house, and why is that really important? It's important not to understate how rich this fund is. The influence says something crazy like 4 billion. Even if they do not invest every single cent into your club, it is clear that they have a multitude of excess capital resources to be able to pour into your club. What then are the reasons about why getting so much more wealth from this fund matter? A couple things. Firstly, this is really important for the accessibility of your fan club. When you have more money, this allows you to keep keep ticket prices and merchandise prices substantially lower. The reason for this is fans care about this and they can pressure the club to have lower ticket prices. But the problem on the comparative is that when you are so desperate for money, you often have to do things like jack up ticket prices or sell shirts that your fans really care about for far higher prices out of economic necessity, because it's the only way to get quick money. As fans, you care a lot about accessibility because of the unique value of seeing your team win in person, of being in the stadium, rather than the cold removed television screen in your living room. But secondly, and this is more important, when you have more money, competitive success is ultimately better. You need capital to be able to buy the best players during draft season. You need money to be able to hire the best coaches. You need money to be able to afford the most prestigious training facilities. And even if you have some money under the status quo, you're always at a comparative disadvantage relative to other teams that ultimately exist because they have more money than you. So you're able to have an equalizing effect where even if your club is doing competitively poorly now, you're able to get the resources to do better. Before I impact this, I'll take closing opposition.
So why even clubs in League One or Segunda, which are lower tier leagues in their respective championships, still get full stadiums in England and Spain?
I think this is an entirely assertive characterization. I think a lot of clubs that are in lower leagues are like woefully underfunded and don't do well because fans don't care about rooting behind these teams. You need to explain why that is true structurally. Why then do teams care, or fans rather, care a lot about competitive success? Firstly, you have a massive stake in the well-being of this team. Your identity is based around your club. You probably feel sad and despondent because you witnessed your club doing well historically, and now you feel like the identity of success of your team is something that you remembered but is now being removed. We give the example like the Boston Celtics right now, where they're currently at like massive sadness amongst fans because a team who once did really well are now doing poorly. Secondly, though, a baseline level of success is critical in increasingly building more fandoms because more people are increasingly going to get behind your club when it starts doing better. But it's important in validating your own identity. We have a larger pool of community who's also rooting for this team as well. Final claim, why are you too likely to have a large amount of leverage and operational autonomy under our side of the house? A few things. Firstly, even if you don't buy that worse actors are going to come in, our mitigation in that claim about how the Saudi fund is like a million other priorities means that they're probably not going to care about your sports club that much. They want it to be profitable, but when they have 200 other investments, they have no incentive to like pressure your club or to like hire a lot of people to force your club to do one particular thing. Secondly, though, the investment fund wants the support of fans for profitability. It is bad for the profitability of your club if you alienate large numbers of fans because they start boycotting you, because you're unhappy with how things have changed. You need fans showing up. You need fans rooting for your team to get advertisements and to get people showing up to stadiums. Thirdly, your club probably does not have that much of a defined identity when it comes to operational practices. This is because since you were successful in the past and you're now doing poorly, I think that fans are probably used to a lot of operational changes. You probably kicked out the people who were responsible for the sinking of the club, and therefore internal ways that the club policy might change is probably less important to you than guaranteeing a basic level of success. The final thing to say here is that even if the club has or the fund has perverse incentive of trying to force your team to do well and to be really profitable, the best way to maximize profitability is quite literally to ensure the success of this team, which coincides with the incentives of fans who want to see the team who is their family win. For all these reasons, I'm very proud to stand in opening government.
I thank the Prime Minister for their speech. May we now have the Leader of Opposition.
Okay, am I audible to all? Am I audible again?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so there's a lot of debate-land stuff going on in the first speech, and I'm, as a recovering football addict, I'm gonna try to clean it up. First of all, the previous speaker completely misunderstands how a football fan works. Completely misunderstand how football fans actually think, what is their identity, what they think, etc. Success is less important to football fans than community, than like identity of being a club member itself. There's very little correlation, and the POI points it very clearly. It's patently obvious that there is no correlation, no strong correlation between fandom and success. It's not immediate. There are clubs that are losing for 20 years. They have huge amounts of fans, etc. So I have no idea what the previous speaker is talking about. It really doesn't matter. Bad clubs also have fans. It doesn't kill them, etc. loyalty is semi-built on losing for football clubs. There are football clubs which element of their identity is the fact that they suck major dick in their competitions. So basically, it can also be a point of pride. We stayed through thick and thin. We are the hardcore. And remember, who are we actually talking about here? These are fans who are engaged in a losing club. Their interests are already outside of sports success. They may dream of previous glory, but for 20, 30 years, they haven't had a championship. They built the club the right way on being local, on being the identity of me, of this club that I like and support. So basically, do not underestimate the locality of football, because as you see, most of us are actually born into local clubs. Maybe then we switch to like a huge Manchester City or United, but I will come back to this because this will be important later. So assume that these are the 80% of strong like fans, that they actually have some incentive to like actually even have an opinion about this. So these people, you also underrate who they actually are, because an absolute vast majority, I'm willing to live with this generalization. If there's an angry football fan, report me to equity. Most of football fans are clearly right-wingers. They do not mind if there's anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant, anti-gay shit spewed on the stadiums, in the transparency that are applauded by those strong fans themselves. So trust me, an Arab with money is a bit of a cognitive dissonance, isn't it? Because you can fear the Arab person, for example, but still want their money. But I think that in the football fans' mind, like the idea of patriotism, locality, of like anti-immigrant, anti-other feelings are extremely strong in this group. So basically, the first speaker has no idea how those football fans actually work. But what's even more important, that there is a new image, and there are three prongs to this. There's a new image of the club, there's new sports logic, and there's new money logic in the club. Let's start with the image, because the image immediately changes. I'm very sure that many of us football fans have been like, you're a freaking sellout. You sold Chelsea to like, it's now a Russian toy. PSG is now like, whatever, like they have just so much money, it's not even fair anymore. Why? Because in sports, there are right and wrong ways to win. There are respectable ways to win that fans like and adore, and there's some unwritten code that you have to fulfill. You know, an element of a losing culture may be seeing my 18-year-olds from my like school academy, seeing them struggle, seeing them develop, seeing them be born into like future stars that they flame out. But this doesn't happen here because everybody around you sees this. And we also come back to that. New sports logic. As I mentioned before, previously the club with its financial consideration maybe had to perform like maybe find local players. Maybe it was even more receptive to the local like fans, the comments about coaching and like sports decision. But like this logic is immediately changed because the success is paramount to this outside fund. Because why? They need to earn money. They're not interested in revitalizing like downtown Poznań, my city that I live in, just because there's a football club there. They want to earn money. And this changes the money logic of the entire enterprise. And the previous speaker was saying something about like making the football arenas full, etc. It doesn't matter. Who cares about the stadiums? Stadiums are like 5–10% of revenues of the club. It's merchandising, it's licensing for TV, it's licensing for games, for advertising. This is what happens when you have international some form of success, and then you turn away from your local base because you don't need them anymore and not spew some hateful stuff that will be visible on TV. So the new club forgets like big media. Big media is not gonna see you as this like nice local club that just came up to the top. Local hooligans, they're just gonna look bad on TV. You need to turn away from your base, which is the stakeholder, the only stakeholder basically we're talking here in this debate, the one that has the most stuff. So they have to earn money, they have to change everything. So finally, so why does this image stuff really, really matter? Because local hooligans, I'll get to someone before time. Local brotherhood of hooligans is actually usually who is gonna be my audience as the fan from this debate. Your audience is who? Not like the rest of football world. It's like the people around who I want to respect me. So Chelsea fans, like Chelsea went from a working man's club to a Russian oligarch rich toy. Okay, I'm taking POI from somebody. Let it be Benji.
Oh, so altruists, I agree with you, but they're like 2% of the actual base. You need to be a little bit more comparative to people that you're talking about. A lot of these people do say care about certain amounts of success. I wouldn't object to it. That's why Newcastle, working class team, really would have wanted this deal to go through.
Sure, there are cases just because they were friends. There were protests in front of Manchester City Stadium. So basically, yes, there are cases on both sides of the house. Point me to the reason why your case is more important than all the reasons I presented to you. Why there are structural reasons why most of football fans do not like outside intervention, and there are good reasons for it. So basically, you have probably criticized enemy sellouts previously. There is a right and a wrong way to win games. I don't think opening government has done any significant job besides some financial stuff and financial benefits, which I don't think is that crucial, just as success may not be as crucial as opening government portrays sports to be. And the fans are clearly, we characterize them much, much better and showed you why they have structural incentives to reject outside help, because it would make them lose a little bit of the element of the identity, which is actually the crux of what being a football fan is. Thank you.
I thank the Leader of Opposition for that speech and would now like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to further the case for opening up. Hear, hear.
In the first 45 seconds of the speech, I just want to point out how ludicrous the opening opposition case in this debate was. Because the argument that flows from the opening opposition is premised on the idea that fans are racist and therefore they're just going to hate any foreign influence. But notably, I think that this is a remarkably uncharitable characterization, a broad sweeping generalization. I think far from the structural characterization or structural analysis that they described it as. But notably, even if you bought that was true, they didn't respond to two crucial lines of analysis from the opening government team. First, the mitigation from our bench about would be very unlikely to change the operations of the club, and why is going to be injecting money, not changing operations. The second important thing to note was that they failed to engage with the comparative in this debate. And let me be very clear about the comparative. The comparative is something like the Seattle Supersonics, where after their losing streak, they lost revenue over time and continually got to the point in which they had to relocate to Oklahoma City because the owner had to sell it. If the opening opposition case in this debate is about locality, I think that is about the worst thing possible for a fan base, because it is literally uprooting a club and moving it away from the fans that love it and adore it. I'm going to chat then about two different things in this speech. First of all, I want to talk about the incentives of fans and what fans care about, and compare the claims that come out between the opening opposition and the opening government on this issue. And second of all, I want to talk about why in the long run, our policy is much better at being able to achieve substantial change, ensuring that the club retains its identity. On the first issue about what the incentives are, let me first of all engage with what we get from the opening opposition on this issue. The first thing that they tell you here is that success is less important than identity. And they assert that what really matters to individuals is locality. Let me give you a few different lines as to why this is right, is that this is a previously successful club. And that's very important, because in the vast majority of previously successful clubs, they already have compromised on a unique style or a unique play style. The reason why is because they want to win games. And to be a historically dominant dynasty, that means that you're going to be changing your play style to match what exactly is desirable or good in that time period. So for instance, if you think three-point shots are better in basketball in your basketball dynasty, you will change because that is a significant part of your identity. The second observation that I want to make about this argument is that it is reliant on an extremely narrow characterization, because we need to believe that the overwhelming majority of fans are racist. But I think that this is a deeply implausible claim. Perhaps they may talk about football fans, but that's far away from the majority of fans who are in, for instance, the US and in a generally more liberal environment, I think, than most football clubs are. So I can just counter assert to that fans aren't racist. There's no logical way to adjudicate this. I think it's just a bizarre claim that comes out from their side of the house, which is deeply, deeply unpersuasive. The third thing that I want to engage with is their argument about image changes. And they say that this is going to look like a significant departure from your past values and that you're selling out. Importantly enough, if you think about the contextualization of my case, this is already a club that likely sold out in the past, given the fact that they got the best players, got the best coaches at a certain point. So they've already sold out at some point in all likelihood, and therefore this is unlikely to be a large marginal harm. What did we provide you that was directly responsive on this issue and that they did not engage with? We told you that this investment fund is the best possible investment fund because it's very likely that they're going to have a hands-off approach in comparison to other investors who are domestic, for instance, or smaller investors who don't have a multitude of assets. The less assets an investor has, the more they will actively manage each one because they have more time for each individual asset. And that means that on our side of the house, it's very likely that the public investment fund isn't going to be overreaching and isn't going to care that much. Even if it was overreaching in its capacity, it's deeply unlikely that it has an incentive to alienate that fan base. So for instance, if they know that revenue streams primarily come from local consumers and local purchasers, then clearly they will cater their techniques and their way of managing a club towards those local fans. So even in the worst case scenario where you care about locality, you will factor that in anyways. So the only harm then that's exclusive to their side is the small number of fans who hate Middle Eastern people and will hate the fact that Saudi Arabia has bought the club. I think that is a tiny harm, and given our comparative, it's also that you will end up having someone else buy the club. I think deeply uncomparative in this debate. What did we tell you on this thing? We told you that money is massively important. And they talk you can get money fees when you have less fans who watch. Clearly, some fans will subscribe to a club on either side of the house, but what really matters in this debate are those fans who are added into the club as a consequence of the fact that they're successful, or the fact that existing fans are willing to pay top dollar for things like tickets, therefore generating revenue and therefore leading to substantial benefits. Therefore, I think we've amply demonstrated to you in this debate, at least on the top half, that money matters more than identity and their arguments are deeply implausible. Now on to something that they completely did not respond to, which was the comparative. Our argument in this debate was that an economically struggling club will eventually have to come to the negotiating table in order to keep themselves afloat. And that's because some of these clubs which end up struggling get into a self-perpetuating cycle. They get less revenue for all the reasons that we suggest. They get worse players and start going to the bottom of the league and being a generally unprofitable club. So the business owner needs to do something with it. The argument that we provided was that every other option is worse. That if you negotiate in the future with any other party when you have worse funds and a worse economic state, they will have more leverage. That if you engage with domestic investors or smaller investors, you're more likely to get a substantial harm of active investment strategies, which means that you have a shift in the way in which a locality of that club operates and in which that club's play style works. Now, I want to add an extra mechanism here. I think this is deeply important. Because in the worst case scenarios, these clubs are no longer able to operate in the city that they are currently existing in. They're going to be bought up by a domestic investor who wants to relocate that club to the city that they live in because they want to bring a basketball club over. And in those instances, you absolutely lose this debate on your own metric because the Seattle Supersonics now becomes the Oklahoma City Thunder, alienating all previous fans who are the actor in this debate who are relevant and important. At the bottom of the speech, I think it's important to recognize that the opening opposition was deeply unresponsive, but that the most important issue in this round and strategically the most valuable thing was Naomi's first argument, because we're able to demonstrate why every harm that the opposition wants to talk about becomes substantially worse on their side of the house. You can cross-apply those mechanisms to any harm they want to talk about. Very proud too.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for that speech, and now would like to invite the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Here.
Can you hear me well?
Yep, you're audible.
I will not allow Jason to lie in this debate because we know shit about this sport. Seattle Supersonic was bought by the investor who promised to stay in the city, but because it's not lucrative and want to make money, switch and move the club to the Oklahoma, where it was most profitable. If I will be the fan of Seattle Supersonic, I will be deeply disappointed and I will be feeling like betrayed and I will be connected to like the money or like to selling out, which are not in a fair play rules in the football. This is the lies from opening government, and I wanted to point out before I move to the constructive. I have one big logical gap in their link. The fan is not the account manager. They don't have Excel spreadsheets in terms of what is the financial situation, who is going from what kind of particular sources, and how the club is operating. By the perception outside, what your colleagues and your co-fans talking about, what in the local media that are writing about your club, what the other fans which you are meeting on the games, and when you are fighting to like get the best recognition and best feelings. That's the audience, which is important for the random fan, not the audit and not the other things which are completely delusional in the sports reality from opening government. I wanted to point out as well that their comparative, it's crazy, right? Because they never engage to the full analysis from Dawid. How the investments from the Saudi Arabia funds, it's changing the risk investment and the perception of the money and how you perceive the league. You probably are trying to buy the most lucrative stars because they are increasing your chance for success, right? This is how PSG is operating. This is how handball Qatar team is operating. And all of the media, it's saying they are not trying to win and develop their own structures. They are trying to buy the best people, because if you are the sheikh and sitting in the VIP place in the stadium, you want to see the wins and you want to see the best games performed by the players, and you don't care about the spirit of the sport because you are investor and you are not the fan. This is extremely important, especially if that's the first person debate. I wanted to talk about a couple of things in my speech. Firstly, about the fan characterization, why you don't want to be connected to the petrodollars. Second, about the predictable future, how the structures in the club will change in the long term, and why you are more likely to disengage from the club because of the media, because of the negative circuits approach and things which are connected to yourselves. But before I will with Dawid more, I wanted to respond to a few more things from opening government. It's unclear the accessibility point, right? We are probably talking about clubs like PSG or like something which already have recognition and already giving people access. But even if not, why as a fan, if I'm already a fan and I didn't leave them because they lost previously, I'm deeply engaged in the history of this and I don't want to leave this identity, right? Why I should care about some people outside of this, it's unclear what kind of direct revenue that will give to the club, which will satisfy my perception or my feelings. This is extremely unclear after them. Then they try to strawman our case and said that we give uncharitable characterization. We are talking not about the people who are watching Champions League final on Saturday evening. We are talking about the people who are real fans, who are singing these songs on the stadium, who are starting verbal fights in the pubs about saying who is better and why I'm taking care about that. We are talking about people who are following the local news and are identifying every single piece of material about this club and taking that very personal. Therefore, it's a likely scenario that they will be also right-wing and quite substantiated overview on the political sphere based on what we are seeing in majority of the stadium and from the majority of the fans. So that's the nuance of this characterization which Dawid provided in this debate. Let's talk about the three mechanisms which we told you. A, it's the investment type, which I already mentioned, right? If you are the investor, you are not thinking about, oh, I want to feel nicely, I want to be likable, I want to see this trophy on my box, I want to see people investing money and giving a lot of things, right? Therefore, you are not taking local coaches. Therefore, you are not looking for development of the players in the long run. You are looking for the people who will guarantee you the win, who are the famous football player. And here is the crux of this case and the nuance. In this sport, you can make some compromises to go to the mainstream, but selling yourself fully and rejecting all of the principles or like all of the fair play rules and like seeing these underdogs and seeing how your club perform, but also staying with them. It's extremely hard because you are picking the easy way which never gave you respect, when people will be treating you as a traitor, and when you will be sitting in the pub drinking a beer and trying to enjoy the game, people will be like, oh, you support the sellers, right? Even if they win, who will cares about this? Because this is not the fair thing. That's the perception of the fan. That's the auditorium which these fans have. And this is something which was completely missed in this debate. But bad press and publicity is also crucial, right? This is the media and the other people around you. This is how the interviews will be happen. This is how people will be portraying your club. Ask your friends how people perceiving the PSG or other clubs. They never will be perceived as the true sports spirit, and people didn't respect that kind of fans and everything. Before I move on, I will take CG. OG?
Your case is unresponsive because the vast majority of successful clubs had deviated from the principle of locality in the past in order to get the best players in order to win. That means that this is a symmetric harm on either side of the house.
No. Because we gave you direct weighing and direct characterization why we don't care about the economic outcomes and why we are taking the bullet that this club might losing, but that also will strengthen your locality and strengthen your connection to the club. Also, in the long term, the morale of the players and the coaches, if they will be switching after like losing the season and not staying the longer, they will not create the connection with the fans. So you will be more disengaged with the club because you will not feel the connection. The important weighing is as follows. The winning and losing, it's something inherent for the sports culture. And we don't have the situation that when one club is losing, automatically all fans are switching. But they are waiting for the better days. They are staying with the club and trying to interact and support. And that's how to build loyalty and identity. And that's what we saw in the history, that clubs which didn't have money or didn't have success still had this fan base and try to find alternative sources. We believe that it is less likely that you will get different types of sponsorship if you will take the investment from the Saudi Arabia. But more important, on the top half, they never actually analyze why the economic structure is the priority in this debate. And that's how the cares hinge on, without a bunch of lies, how the sports culture looks like in reality. I'm proud to oppose.
Thank you for that speech. That wraps up the debate for the upper half. And now for the lower house debate, may we have the member of government.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to start in 3, 2, 1. I think crucially, the new thing that Closing Government is going to bring to you is the comparative that you will mostly just be bought out by some other company, some other investor anyway. What we're going to tell you is why specifically this particular Saudi fund, just only this one compared to other Emirati or like Middle Eastern like investors, is going to be the best one for you and is going to actually have incentives that are not just business incentives, but also incentives to whitewash their money, make you look good, and therefore do lots of good things for the community. I'm going to start with that, and so I'm going to talk about the particular incentives behind this particular Saudi fund. Then secondly, I'm going to talk about the comparative. Thirdly, I'm going to talk about fans' interest and clash a lot with OO about the loyalty stuff and whether you seem like you're selling out. And then finally, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you get a sustainable identity if I have time. If I don't have time, it integrates in nicely. So let's begin. Okay, let's talk about Saudi's incentives. So this particular Saudi investment fund, right, it's so government linked that it basically is being used to launder the money or whitewash the money in a way that makes their money look legitimate and makes the Saudi state have more optically look better on the world stage. They want to socialize themselves into the Western stage. They want to be like, yeah, mates with all the like English football fans and all the English football players because they have that prestige. So I think this is quite unique, right? Why is this unique? One, it's not a business investment. It's a charitable investment. It's an investment to rehabilitate your image. This means that they crucially care a lot more about the optics. OG say that this means that they won't overstep and overmanage the teams. I think it goes far more than that. And what CG will say is it means that A, they're going to do lots and lots of charity work through football for clubs, which is great because football clubs are uniquely rooted towards the community, which is exactly what OO want, right? Like you're the ones that have like are a part of those like fledgling communities. You have the outreach. You're able to help like kids from the wrong side of tracks. But secondly, it also means that you have lots and lots of training academies because you want to be the ones that start spotting the talent. You want to be the ones that give the football scholarship, basketball scholarships to all of these like young underprivileged kids, because then you get that success story that you can then sell on the world stage to say, yes, the Saudis have done this, our brand has done this, and we've been able to create a big impact on the world. So I think that crucially means that you get lots and lots of good things, lots and lots of charitable community-based action from that club that, one, increases the level of localization and local identity that OO wants, but two, also is something that is missing from any other investor. That is why I think that if on all of upside, they have to explain if they're going to take any amount of money at all, why they're going to have sufficient money, but also sufficient incentive to be able to do all of the good things that football and sports can do within the community. But secondly, I also think that like this is how we get the pipeline that OO wants. If OO wants a sustainable pipeline in order for you to have the training and development instead of just buying the the current expensive players, I think this is actually how you get it, right? Any other business investor will not do that because it is much more worth it to buy the player after they have established that they are certainly skillful and certainly going to be successful. Then you buy them because there's less risk involved within the investment. It's very risky to invest in a whole bunch of kids that you don't know if they're going to actually be good or not. And on our side, it's only on our side where it actually makes sense because it's not a business account like balance of accounts, but rather it is a charitable thing where you want to be more enmeshed within that community. These Saudi investors want to localize themselves and be accepted in the Western community, which only works when they have those local roots. It only works when their players are uniquely local. It only works when they have, like, they can say that the Newcastle team is made of people who are actually from Newcastle. When they can say that these players are so closely tied with that community that they get therefore the association with that particular part of that community, with that particular town in England. So I think that this is the only time where our team is able to get those incentives and our team is best able to create those training programs and those pipelines for young talent. Why is the comparative that we must be bought out at some point rather than being like just like surviving with like less money? Let's face it, sports is already being massively commercialized. The fact that Man City, the fact that Chelsea have already been sold out, and the fact that they're doing incredibly well, and Man City is so hard to play with because they just play incredibly good football because they have so many training facilities and they have so much resources to just throw at their players, means that you will never be able to be a viable club without necessarily having some amount of money to begin with. OG say that like the amount your success is like your lack of success is a downward spiral and self-reinforcing. What we say in CG is that even if it isn't self-reinforcing, the race to the top of getting lots and lots of money and more money every single year pumping into football and pumping into the league means that you will eventually have to buy out at some point. The difference is the vast majority of clubs get bought out by American businessmen, by like London businessmen, people who treat this as like a business or like something that can earn you money. That calculus of wanting to make profit is bad because number one, it means that you're more likely to fleece the fans. I mean, I just don't buy that like they will be willing to cut prices to tickets the same way the Saudis will, because the Saudis want the tickets, the crowd, the audiences to be filled with lots and lots of white faces so that on their advertisements they seem like part of the Western community. But on the other flip side of it, even if you can afford to cut prices as an American or London businessman, you won't cut prices because you get more profit. Like, it doesn't make sense why you would lessen your profit even if you are able to do so. So I think it's only on our side that we're better able to do that. But secondly, I also think that eventually your players leave, right? Like, club loyalty only matters to some extent. Like, eventually your managers leave, your players leave, and you have no ability to continue sustaining like the amount of money it takes to like upkeep a football club. So I think eventually you're still going to run out of money and you're still going to need to sell out. Okay, I'm going to take a POI now before I move on to the next stuff. Claudia?
This is not prime minister. This is the fans of the club. Why this is likely to be more interest of them than all of the things which we told, which you never responded in your extension?
Yeah, so like my second extension, which I'm going to now, is about the fans' interest. So the biggest contribution we get from opening opposition is that this is going to be like, you're going to be sellout. As a fan, you're going to like be like called lots of like shitty stuff in the pub with your mates, right? Like, I just don't think that's the case. I mean, I think even in the worst case scenario where the club seems to be a sellout, you can shit on the club for selling out, you can shit on the owners, but you still worship the players. You still benefit off the better players that you have. You still benefit off the better players you can buy, but also the better players that you can keep and retain, which are rightfully the pride and joy of your club. Is your club that made them good, but in the status quo they leave because they get bought over by a more lucrative contract from a rival club. Now on your side you get to keep them and you get to say this is ours. That means that you stop the brain drain or the like talent drain that you get within football clubs. Like, look at Ajax, who like always create great players, or like never actually do anything with them because their players just keep getting bought out. But like lastly, you still have cognitive dissonance, right? So you still are able to say, look, we are the best club in the world because of all legendary players, and still replay all the legendary moments within the sport, while also still admitting that your club has sold out. Like that's fine, because the perception of the owners of the club doesn't translate to the players, and we think the cult of personality and the excitement within the sport is more tied towards the players than it is towards the owners of the club. So even if your club is now a commercialized club, you don't go around saying I'm a Liverpool fan, you go around saying I'm a fan of Virgil van Dijk and you wear his jersey. So we don't think it matters to the fans at all. For this reason, propose.
I thank the member of Gov for their speech, and now would like to invite the member of Up. I thank the member of opposition for that speech, and now would like to invite the Gov to wrap up the case for side Gov.
Am I audible?
You are, Benji.
Oh, thanks. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Okay, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what the comparative really looks like in this debate and why it has to be that comparative. I'm going to be talking a little bit about what the investors care about, and then finally what the fans care about themselves. And everything is going to be just integrated into what's sort of happening here. So let's start with like, what is a comparative? So we think it's important to note, and I think this is really important for both of like OO and CO's material, that they don't get to claim that there's just going to remain a local government, right? Local governance of the club or local whatever. Like they have to deal with the actual comparative that was set up here. So OG tell us already from the start, look, it is like a comparative could be that a wealthy owner comes in and buys them out. Oh, tell them, look, no, we don't necessarily need to do this. We can find other range of places to get revenue, i.e. advertising, funding, everything else, which means you won't necessarily have somebody jump in. Also, like Jason has like a really extreme example of this, which probably doesn't apply in most cases. It's someone coming in, buying and moving. That probably only applies to North American franchises. It doesn't happen elsewhere in the world. So, but what we can uniquely come in and tell you is why you are likely to have to sell this off, which completely just like shifts what this debate is going to be. Because we're saying like you are likely going to have to sell off, and you are likely going to have to sell off not to the Saudis, which again isn't part of the debate because opposition can just say, well, we don't want that again, but to a different investor which is looking to do this for profit rather than what we've laid out as to why this has to happen. Why do we think this has to happen? It's because all of the analysis that Sarah gave, untouched by either opposition team, so we assume it stands, which is the fact that like the simply competition that needs to be happening inside the league, the fact that you have more and more investors moving in, the fact that even to come and to compete means that you simply need to be able to have more investors put into your club in order for you to even stay in the Premier League or stay in whatever league you are and not just move down and down and down or eventually go bankrupt, means that you need to have more sources of income. And again, the person making the decision, crucially, is not the fans, but the owner. The owner will make the decision to offload a losing profit, i.e. what Mike Ashley is trying to do now with Newcastle. And then if he doesn't get to sell it to the Saudis, he'll sell it to like a shitty American businessman who is going to do all of the ticket gouging, which we talked about, and ruin the locality. So now, what do the investors care about, right? Now that we actually understand the comparative, and let's compare these two out. So look, OG tell us like, oh, they're going to be completely hands off. Look, we try to be nice to them and not just tell them you're full of shit, guys, because it was a bad thing. And we were like, oh no, yeah, they'll be hands off. Maybe they'll be hands off in the operational thing, even though that's not true. We know that. But what they do care about, and this is important, is that they do care about other things: the community outreach, the whitewashing, all of these kind of stuff as well, which is what we uniquely came and brought in. So I didn't want to make a big deal about it as Jason, but if you're going to call a knife when there isn't none, have better analysis to begin with. So what does OO tell you? OO then tells you, look, the things with that, what the investors are going to care about is just winning and making it absolutely amazing and global. CO tell you the exact same thing. Like, look, they want to have as wide as possible. They don't care about the fan on the ground. They don't care about anything. They just want to be everywhere. Cool. Nuance. We think that there are elements here of which they care about both. A good picture is having Ronaldo in your shirt, right? Awesome. The best picture is having Ronaldo in your shirt next to Phil Foden, i.e. next to the local player which you have brought up and created over time, i.e. having both the locality and the ultimate business. This requires a huge amount of money, which is why we told you that uniquely the Saudis are able to kind of do this, and uniquely they have an incentive. Why? Because it's as we pointed out, this is already a global fan base, i.e. they're not just pissing, when they come in and they piss off the fans, they're not just pissing off like one or two fans, like they're pissing off hundreds, like they're pissing off millions of fans around the world who will backlash and will harm their ability to whitewash if they completely denounce everything the club has to stand to up until that point, which means that they do have an incentive to invest in this. They do have an incentive to invest into the academy, into invest in this, which is, by the way, exactly why you see Manchester City going in and doing this, right? Like, then that's the exact reason why they have the biggest training academies in the world, why they're constantly investing in the community, because it's important for them to have both of these images to come across, because that is the strongest possible image. It costs a shit ton of money to do it, yeah. They got that. which is why they're able to have these kind of things. So they want to have both the pipeline of amazing people coming in and the flashiness. And they also want to have those ties to the community, again, because they want to offset all of that like bad imagery and bad public. And again, they can just throw money at the problem, which is why it's so good, which is why they do all of these community outreach programs, which fans really care about. Like as a fan, I care about the fact that my football club now is running like a local football, like a football club for my kids to come to do, but also just like as a person in the community, I care about the fact that like money is being pushed back into that. Like these are all things which are really, really good for this, yeah? And at the end of the day, what Xiao, like the alternative here, is to have someone come in who even Xiao tell you will just sell off your players as a pipeline. And then the other alternative, you're doing this just for profit, is to either bring in people inside your pipeline and sell them off one after the other, or to never invest at all, right? Like these are the problems that most clubs have to face. And that's why we think that this is the best possible thing. And I'll get into explaining why that is because of the fans overall. But first I'll take closing. Closing? Opening.
I'm sorry. So why necessarily is the alternative is going for profit, right? You can like sell out to a Thai investor like Leicester did, or you as Liverpool might also just get a new sponsor and dug through that.
Cool. I mean, like, so if you're literally saying, like, like if you're comparative to the Thai investors, then like I don't understand how you get anything on your side as well. It's in like that is equally as bad and as problematic as it is in every place. Like all of the problems that you have with lack of localization stuff exist. But also notice that Leicester wasn't able to do that like over time. It's in like they had one season where they did successfully well, but now they're back to the grind of having to sell off players. They're back to the grind of having to do this. So like this is the problem here, what we're talking about. Like it is what is the most likely scenario. So what do fans care about? Look. At the end of the day, like Gav is like, oh, they don't care about winning. Oh, it's like, oh no, they care about locality and like all of these kind of identity. We think they care about both, right? We think they care about success and they care about the community. But like importantly, we explain to you, why the community is not harmed to the degree that they want to be talking about, or even at all by this kind of thing, but also why they have the cognitive disassociation to be able to be, I am for the team and to benefit from the team's success, and even like enjoy like shitting on the owners in clubs, which is actually what they do, right? Like they go and they watch the games in pubs and shit on the owners and enjoy the fact that their teams have won through the personality, which Sarah analyzes you. People are complex, right? They can care about multiple things at once. But the thing is that uniquely they're unable to access success under the other methods and models which they want to talk about, whereas they still have access to the community and community systems under us in the most likely scenarios. So even if there is a slight damage there to what's happening in the community, the success tends to outweigh this. But also there is real reasons for the Saudis uniquely to invest back into that community and to make that unlikely to happen, which is why we think they're okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that speech. And now to wrap up this debate in its entirety, may we have the op whip.